everybody knew everybody. I knew this guy, he lived right here, and I'm friends with him on Facebook nowadays.
It was the proximity of all those houses in the area, and we all came out, after school, and we hung amongst one another, and there was no cops rolling around then. I mean, we all played outside. We didn't have them damn computers or PlayStation 3, baby.
Yeah, I think it was how you could just hang out on a corner, and then 10 minutes later be another person. Next thing you know, you had 50 people hanging out on a corner.
The advantage of a small town is people often grow up together, neighbors and families, and children might be in the same grades year after year. A potential advantage of that is that there's this kind of support system where you have friends, family members, neighbors to encourage you, and so you might be a little bit more willing to take on new challenges and risks.
And this was like 7th grade, 1976. We were camping out in our backyard. We always camped out in the backyard here in Hayfield. And it was safe. My mom didn't have a problem with it. And so a couple friends would come over, we'd pitch the tent. And one night we were camping out, and right in this house, 3 girls that we knew from school, they were camping out too. So we made this arrangement, and we brought up an empty bottle, and we played a game of spin the bottle. So it was really the first time I kissed a girl when I was in 7th grade. There was a barn here in the early days of the community, but in September of 1967 it burned down. The barn experience turned into somewhat of a novelty. Although the land here was owned by George Washington, and it was George Washington's farm, the barn was built years after George Washington. At the time the barn burned down, only a small portion of the community was built at that time, and they were still building some, but everybody seems to have a barn story.
One of the unique things about Hayfield when we first moved here was the 16-sided barn, which was right up the road here, maybe an eighth of a mile. It was initially, my understanding was, it was initially going to be the community clubhouse with an indoor swimming pool. But while the construction was taking place here, they used it to store a lot of materials. A lot of the construction vehicles were parked inside the barn. And as kids, of course, exploring, we would go into the barn, and we'd climb the stairs and sit up in the cupola on the top of it, and then go out on the roof and walk around.
Barn?
Yeah.
The barn. Yep, the barn, well, there's 2 barns. There's a red barn and there's like a brown barn. The red barn was still in pretty good shape, and the brown barn was all rotten, falling down.
Oh gosh, when the barn burned down. Heck, I was just a little pup. I remember being on my little bike. I mean, it was a tiny little thing, and I was cruising down Wicksford, riding towards the where it ended right there at the barricade, and next thing I looked behind me, there's one of the fire trucks coming at me. Had to pull off and everything. There was one thing I will always remember.
One of the memories that I have about the barn burning down was the fact that it burned so quickly and so intensely that the sliding glass door of my mom's house was hot to the touch on the inside. And since it was so hot, you really could only stand and take a few pictures and then kind of go inside, simply because the intense heat from the barn, even though the barn was a few blocks away from the house, it was so intense that you could only stay outside for a few minutes.
One of my memories that's not quite so wonderful, I guess, is when the barn did burn. We knew the family of one of the boys that it happened to, and it wasn't so much the barn burning down that I remembered as how devastated the family was, because when that happened, they could not find him and they were terrified. of where he was. And we all identified with that. My parents certainly did identify with the parents. So the community came together. The family was a fantastic family. This kind of thing could have happened to any one of us. It was an accident. But I remember standing there watching the barn burn, and I just remember the family and how everybody really cared for that family.
The barn was supposedly here in Hayfield Park, but there's some controversy.
One of the issues that seems to never been really resolved in Hayfield is the exact location of the barn. Although Hayfield Park kind of tends to lead people to believe that the barn was actually there in the park, the footprint of the barn is really more or less almost behind me at the intersection of Glamis Drive and Charlton Court. One of the misconceptions is that the barn was somehow closer to the park, when in fact it was really more a little east of where the park stands today. Based upon using the side edge of my mom's house and the photograph I had when I was a little boy, I project that the barn was actually somewhere along this line and more closely about the intersection of Charlton Court and Glamis Drive, which is clearly more eastern of Hayfield Park.
I'll tell you one thing that I found in the research I did on Hayfield. When the Civil War started in 1861, living at that house was a gentleman by the name of Frederick Richard Windsor. And he was a man of means. He had money. And the first thing he wanted to do when Virginia had seceded from the Union, he wanted to join the Confederate Army. And somehow word had made it to Alexandria that he was called Richard, which was his middle name. Word had made Alexandria that Richard Windsor was on his way to join the Confederate Army, and Union cavalry was sent down the Telegraph Road, and they actually captured him. And inside of his bag that he had attached to his horse was a Confederate uniform, some revolvers, and he was taken into Washington City and was sent to the old Capitol Prison. And the Union officer that captured him, he tried to give him $500 to let him go. But this Union officer, he had integrity, and he took him in. Well, he had influence, Windsor did. And he sent a letter to General Irwin McDowell, who was in command of the Union troops at that time, and told him that he had been arrested, and Irwin McDowell had that Union officer arrested and confined and had Windsor released. And Windsor would go on to become a captain in the 5th Virginia Cavalry and served honorably throughout the entire war. He was about 30 years old when he was captured, probably right outside of Hayfield.
Having both an elementary school and a high school right within walking distance of the community was really handy. And we would go to elementary school with the same people we went to high school with, and we had a great football field up here, and on homecoming football we had floats up there, and it was a big social event.
Now pass complete.
Here's where I moved in 1981, just before I graduated high school. It's up by the main road Telegraph. Right behind it is Telegraph Road, and behind that is the football stadium. And I remember growing out in the backyard, we could hear the drums on Friday night. The marching band, and I knew people on the football team, and my friend was in the band. And
football, you know, that was always a good sport. It was got a lot of good guys Hayfield had. Sometimes we couldn't put it all together, but gosh, since our 20-year reunion, we've had kind of like a homecoming party over here at this place. Yeah, it's amazing. It started off real small, grown. Heck, one time I think we had people all back to the class of '76. But it's a real good time. We've got space, and everybody enjoys it, and it's safe, and a lot of good memories are kicked around and everything. it's fun to see everyone.
Youth sports here at Hayfield was a big thing. We had the Hayfield Athletic Club, and there were soccer teams, basketball teams, and baseball teams, so you could play all year round. And Hayfield Athletic Club, they had these patches, and each year you played a different sport, you would get a pin, and like a baseball pin or a basketball pin. And one year, my dad coached, we had a team called the Cavaliers, and this was like 73 or so, and we only won one game all year, but it was a lot of fun.
One of the things about growing up in Hayfield was the sports. Not only the organized sports that we all played together and the high school sports, but we also were into professional sports. And one of the rituals that we had was every Sunday we would get together and play a pickup game of football, and then after that we would all get together and get in somebody's basement and watch the Redskins. And this went on for years. And even after I got out of high school, I joined the military and was stationed over 300 miles away, but if I had a long weekend or a chance to come back to Hayfield to hang out with everybody and watch the Redskins games, I tried to do that every chance I got, and that's what we did.
From the very beginning, there was so much thought and planning and care that went into activities such as scouting, sports. It made it an ideal place for the children to grow up. And I think that's why today you see so many returning and raising their families here, because it was such a great place to go. You know, you could go and find tadpoles and you could find frogs and I mean, it was just box turtles. It was just a grand way of life for children.
Music played a big part back in Hayfield. We all listened to Led Zeppelin. We all went to all kinds of concerts. I remember one summer when the Ted Nugent album Cat Scratch Fever came out. You go around singing it real loud just to piss people off. Cat Scratch Fever!
Asking me what bands I've been in. A bunch. Jester. We were a kind of a Fleetwood Mac cover band, I guess. We had 2 female vocalists. We won the Hayfield Battle of the Bands up at Hayfield High School back in, I think it was 79 or 80. Can't remember. I think it was like 79 because I think I was a sophomore in high school. But it was great. Light show, fog machine. Blew away the rest of the competition there at Hayfield Secondary's field house. Sounded great too in there. Great echo. Just a wonderful room to play loud in. But that was one band. Then there was the Rush cover band I was in with Julian Carrera. We never really officially had a name. I guess at one point it was like Odyssey or something, but I remember playing at Mike Salmon's house for, I guess it was just a party, and we had a great time in the basement. Filled his whole basement with fog, had his mom freaking out. Fun times. Back then, there was a party every weekend at somebody's house, you know. Sometimes it was over at mine, but those were the days.
I used to ride motorcycles with him a lot, you know. But most of the time I was by myself with the motorcycle. The bikes, I had a lot of friends with the bikes. We used to go riding all over the place. You know? I used to go up to that elementary school with Paul Reed and riding around that school.
Oh, this man, he's wonderful. You ought to, these people, all these people around here, they worship him like a god. He's like a snail crawling on a straight razor. Ooh, it's just great.
It was great, all right. That was a Pack of Wimps Now, modeled after Apocalypse Now, which we had seen a bunch of times in the 80s. And so we gathered a bunch of people, rented this old Beta camera. Actually, back in '84, that was cutting edge. And we tried to make our own movie. We got this boat. Yeah, right up here, I think this used to be a trail, and right about here, I was in like 4th grade or 5th grade, and I said, hold on, there's some frogs, we're gonna catch them. Well, my friend had a BB gun, and he didn't want to hold on, so he shot me right in the arm, and the BB rolled around, and I tried to get it back to the hole so it would come out, but you know, I was young and I started getting weak. And next thing you know, we went to the hospital and got them to cut it out.
Here's the old fire pit. Of course, we had a big, huge tree back then that we would all sit on. You could fit like 20 people on the tree. And we used to steam crabs right here. Me and some of the fellows, we'd go down to fish market down in DC, bring them back, build a big fire. Didn't have to worry about the shells, just tossed them. And it was just a neat place to hang out.
We all had like the uniform. We all had the jeans and the Levi's jacket, you know. It was like came in corduroy of every different color and like the fleece collar and stuff. That was the uniform with the wallaby.
With the wallaby, yeah. That's what we all wore.
And then the T-shirt with the one pocket there for your cigarette.
Or the flannels in the winter.
Yeah. We all had.
In 1976, growing up here, I had one sibling, and that was my twin brother Dave. And in 1976, we decided we were going to buy new cars, our first new car. And we separately went to Klein Chevrolet over on Edsel Road in Alexandria and ordered our cars. And sure enough, we ordered exactly the same type of car, same color, same interior color, everything. So they were delivered on the same day, and we had to, being twins, we stopped dressing alike when we were about 10 years old, but we had to dress up in the same type of clothing and get a publicity shot of receiving our keys from the salesman. And it was in the Alexandria Gazette newspaper. Kind of a cool thing, but it was pretty embarrassing for both of us at that time.
We established out of the necessity of violent kids in the neighborhood or from other neighborhoods coming into Hayfield, we had to pick up and organize a neighborhood watch, which we called the Hayfield Security Patrol. So we had a group of kids come in from another neighborhood that smashed about 40 windshields one weekend. And then the following weekend they repeated the same thing. So that got everybody in an uproar and decided to start watching for them. And as a result, we established the Hayfield Security Patrol. And what we would do is patrol the neighborhood on weekends and selected nights with these signs. Some of the cars would have these signs on, some wouldn't.
Not knowing what moving here was going to do, like the connections that I was going to make, and now looking back so many years later, we try to get together with other girlfriends that still live in Hayfield. We try to do a lunch every January because it's the only time we ever see each other, but we make that effort because we have that connection.
So now my kids are at the high school now. My daughter will be graduating next year, and my son will be graduating a few years after that. I think they've benefited greatly being here in Hayfield. One of the things I remember as being a child is there were so many kids, and you knew everybody in the neighborhood. They weren't necessarily the friends that you played with, but you knew each other. Parents knew each other. You had little groups of friends that usually lived within a block or two of your house, and as a result you ended up with growing up with kids that you went to school with, not only as they grew up into adult age, but there are quite a lot of people that are still friends to this day. And as a result, there are a lot of people that live the second generation that are back in Hayfield. I think the kids, hopefully here in maybe about 10 years or so, will maybe even be the third generation that'll move into Hayfield.
Yeah, in 1993, when my mom moved out, we took a bunch of, it was the last Hayfield reunion party. and we took a bunch of pictures, and we showed our movie that we made, A Pack of Wimps, and you know, it was a good chance to get the whole group together again, just one last time. I mean, of course, and you know, most of them had already moved out of the neighborhood, but my mom appreciated it, and it was, you know, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity, and we really took advantage of it.